Last week, some of you were here, some of you weren't here, but I'm sure those who weren't here obviously watched the video.
Hell no. They got one shot.
I made my shot, man. So, in that, one of the things that we talked about, really one of the main things we talked about was how Moshe Rabbeinu's beginning attempts to talk to the people were, as President Trump would call it, a disaster, right? And it didn't go well. At the end of Parshat Shmos, and Parshat Shmos ends with Moshe basically saying, "Why did you? I told you so. I told you I was the wrong guy. Why did you send me? Why did you do bad to these people?"
Sure, it was a great idea.
And Hashem said, "Now you're going to see." We spoke about that last week. I'm sure now that Barry knows all about that, he's going to go back and watch last week. Anyway,
Watch it.
Anyway, so then this week begins. Hashem spoke to Moshe, is saying, now I'm going to give you an answer. What's going to happen?
This is your bar mitzvah. This is your bar mitzvah.
VaEra, what?
It's your bar mitzvah.
My bar mitzvah.
Oh, my son knows.
VaEra Avram Yitzchak Yaakov Be'El Shekayim Mishnei Hashem Lo Nadati Lehem. I appeared to Avram Yitzchak. I didn't tell him my full name. I'm not going to go into every word here you can talk about, but whatever. And I made them promises, and I heard the problems. And now HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, you asked me, why did I send you? I sent you because Amor Bnei Yisrael Ani Hashem. Speak to the people and tell them I am Hashem. And V'hotzesi, V'yitzalti, V'go'alti, V'lokachti, all the four Lashonos Lashon Geula, right? That things are going to go well. And really, the main thing, which we don't necessarily speak about, was that Lokachti Eschem Li'olam V'yisi Lachem Le'elokim. I will be to you for God. Not just I'll be God, but I'll be your God. Right? Yidatem ki Hashem Elokeichem. You'll know that I am Hashem, your God. Okay? So his message to them was, in other words, Hashem, who they're going to get to know very well over the 10 Makos, Kriyas Yamsuf, is in fact your God. And I will bring you to the land, etc. Okay? So in other words, Hashem is saying, what's the answer to Moshe's question, why did you send me? This is why I sent you. I sent you to deliver this message, albeit after the disaster that had to happen before. Why? Last week, right? That had to work out that way. But the message basically is they should be and they should understand that I'm Hashem, your God, and right. And what does Moshe do? And the last line of the first paragraph, "Vayidaber Moshe keino b'nei Yisrael." Moshe, in fact, delivers this message. And what happens? Lo shamu el Moshe. They didn't listen to Moshe. Why? Kotzer ruach u'me'avoda kasha, because they had they weren't able to kotzer ruach. Let's wait for explaining that. Basically, their ruach, their spiritual level was short, and their ability to hear highfalutin, great ideas about this. Right? They want to know tachlis. What's going on? When are we getting out? What's with the straw? They weren't really to hear drushes like that. And Avodah Kasha, they were simply worn out. They were exhausted. They were, all the work they were doing. Okay, so is Moshe? So, obviously more disappointed. It isn't quite as bad as the last disaster where they yelled at Moshe, right, and told him that he was to blame for the terrible things that he did for coming, but certainly wasn't successful. So, what's the next thing right away? You would think that Hashem would say, maybe give it a shot. No, Hashem says right away, "Vayidaber Hashem Moshe Lemar, Bo daber el Paro melech Mitzrayim." Go speak to Paro again. V'yishalach b'nei Yisrael miyatzon. Tell him he's got to send them out. Did that work last time? No, not really. Right? So Moshe says, "Lefnei Hashem, Hein b'nei Yisrael lo shamu elai ve'ech yishme'eni Paro v'ani araz masai." Right? And Gemara says that this is one of the 10 Kal V'chomers, right, that appear in the Torah. Everybody knows what a Kal V'chomer is, right? If it's a lesser case, certainly. So he's saying, if the Jewish people didn't listen to me, then certainly Paro is not going to listen to me, right? That's a Kal V'chomer, right? And besides, I'm Aral Sfasayim, I am whatever that means exactly. Difficult of mouth. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. I'm not convinced it means stuttering, but whatever it was, it's some kind of speech defect. Okay? So, Gemara actually discusses, is that a good Kal V'chomer? Right? It says, why did the Jewish people listen to him? Because they were working so hard, because they didn't have a chance of breath. There was one person in Egypt who didn't suffer for that problem. Paro, right? He wasn't Avodah Kasha, he wasn't Kotzer Ruach, so maybe he could listen. So it's not a great Kal V'chomer. In fact, the Gemara says, with the whole thing, dialogue of it, if you know what I'm talking about, you can't make a Kal V'chomer more than the original. Okay? But for some reason, he's being said, he said, tells him to this, so Hashem answers Moshe, and he says, I'm going to answer. Does he address the Kal V'chomer? Not at all. What does he say? Vaydaber Hashem al Moshe vel Aaron, vayitzaveim el Bnei Yisrael. He commands them to the Bnei Yisrael, ve'el Paro melech Mitzrayim, and to Paro, king of Egypt, lahotzias Bnei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim, to take out the Jewish people from Mitzrayim. Now, what does that pasuk mean? Anybody want to try and translate that?
First, it includes Aaron. And that brings Aaron into the equation.
Okay, Aaron is brought to that equation. But I'm not talking about that. What exactly is he? Are they, if you will, being asked to do here?
Go back and talk to the Jews, and then talk to God.
To the Jews, right?
And then talk
to the Jews. What are you going to tell the Jews? Lo, tzis Bnei Yisrael being Mitzrayim, that they should take out the Bnei Yisrael from Mitzrayim. Maybe it's not
God sent them.
What?
God sent them.
Okay, but that's not the message here.
No.
It says that they should be both see Bnei Yisrael being Mitzrayim. That's what it says. You know, it's hard to understand what that means. Maybe Al Bnei Yisrael. And when he's saying to Paro, say it again. I mean, you know, and he just said it's not going to work. He said, go anyway. What?
I thought element regarding Bnei Yisrael. Oh, so okay.
Right. It's not an easy pasuk to understand what's going on over there. Okay, and what is this business with a Ras Pasai? What's he at? We already dealt with that at the non-birdie bush. Hashem said, you know, who gave a mouth to a person and who made it. You know, that's me. Don't worry, I'll be okay. And besides, Aaron is with him. So what's that all about? It's also hard to understand. Okay. So what is the tzivui here? What is the question? If we want to, we have a couple of questions. What's the Kal V'chomer? What's this Aral Sfasayim Dafka now? And what exactly did he command them? Okay. So Vayitzaveim el Bnei Yisrael. So the Sifri, that's in that first box on the right. It says Sifri. And this comes from the Sifri. Sifri is the Medrash Sefer Bamidbar, right? We're learning Sefer Shemos, but the Sifri and Sefer Bamidbar on the pasuk Anochi Harisi Esal Bazeh. That's after the people were complaining and they wanted meat, etc. And Moshe kind of goes off in a rant over there with, did I give birth to these people? What do you want from me? How can I do this? So amongst the things that Moshe says, that it says, Heichad Dibel okay. Where did Moshe say this? B'shah Shamarlo, when Hashem said to him, Lech Nechayas, that's a little messed up, that should go lead the people. It's dependent on you, or is it not dependent on you? So it says, Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe vel Aaron vayitzaveim el Bnei Yisrael. Here, Hashem commanded. It references our pasuk. Amar lahem, he said to Moshe and Aaron, you should know. Hey Yodim, you should know about the Jewish people. They're the easiest people on earth. Sarvanim, they don't want to listen. Tarchanim, they give a lot of tircha, they make life difficult, right? Right? That's every rabbi's got to read this.
Sarvanim is from the word Sirov.
Read this Sifri. What?
Sarvanim, that's from the word Sirov.
They're bisarev. They refuse. They refuse to do what you say.
So, a person, the man doesn't get is a Sirov.
A Sirov is in court when somebody is summoned to court and they refuse to come. They get a Sirov.
So that's.
Or maybe if they refuse to give a get, which they've been commanded. Right, that's where the Sarev. And Tarchanim, they're Mashriach. Right? But nevertheless, Al Menashe Tekablu Aleichem Shiu Mekalu L'Veschem, and you have to accept that they're even going to curse you. V'soklim Eschem Ba'avanim, and even throw rocks at you. Right? That's why in Tzavei B'nei Yisrael Hashem is telling you over here, you're worried that they complained a bit? Don't worry, it's not going to get easier. Yeah, 40 years of the testing to look forward to.
It's very encouraging.
We ain't saying nothing.
So I think he's saying like Paro's the least of your problems.
It's there's problems with this. What can I say?
The Jews is the hard part. Paro's easy.
I remember several times thinking of one particular, when I left one of my rabbinic positions, so I was having a bit of a hard time, and I spoke to my Rebbe, Rebbe Tversky, and he said, what's going on over here, what should I do? He told me, don't worry about it. He gave me 3 reasons. First of all, because even Moshe Rabbeinu said they're going to stone me. So what do you want? Second of all, he said would have done the same to him. And the third thing he said was that at that particular time, the kids were growing up and we didn't have good schooling over there. And he said you have to leave, and if it would be a little difficult for you, you wouldn't have the heart to leave. So it made it easy for you. Maybe that's the reason. But anyway. Okay, but it's difficult, and in fact, there's an interesting Rambam here in the box next to it in Hilchos Sanhedrin. He talks about how a Jewish leader should lead. Asur la'adam linhog b'sarara al hatzibur b'kazas ruach. A leader may not overly be, b'sarara means try to lord over them, and to be arrogant. Elaba'anava v'yira, but you should be humble and have awe. And any leader who tries to intimidate the tzibur, not l'shem shemayim, he'll be punished for that, and he won't see children. That's Talmid Chacham as a son, etc. On and on. And then if you go on, I'm just skipping a little just because we're pressed for time here. He says, you see, there's a line that starts Kibosha Rabbeinu. Like it has to be like Rosh Hashanah, as it says, Kasha Yisa Ha'omi and Sayonik, that he had to carry them like a mother has to carry a child. Nari Omer about Sabeh Softichem, Ashar Li Dayin Sheyizbol As Hatzibur, right? That the Dayin has to tolerate the tzibur, like a mother has to tolerate all the stuff that the kid does to her. Teilumat Moshe Rabban Shel Kol Neviim. That once Hashem sent him in Mitzrayim, it says after that, Vayitzavenu Bnei Yisrael. Nevertheless, don't be put off by their complaints. Go back to them. And again, as we saw, the Sifri says, even if they're gonna throw rocks at you, that's it. So that's why one shot perhaps in Vayit Sabeno Bnei Yisrael. He's saying, you're telling me they're not listening, they're having, it's a disaster. Don't worry about it. That's the job. It'll be okay, right? Okay, but. Maybe there's more to it than that, though that's one interesting perhaps to it. But perhaps there's another interesting part. I didn't have it here in the Chazal, but there's an interesting. Look at over here below that. There's a quote from Jeremiah, Yirmiyah Perek Lamed Dalet. Okay, over there it talks about. Like this, Hashem says to Yirmiyah from he's to convey the following message. Koamar Hashem Elokei Yisrael, Anochi Karisi Brisas Avosecha Miyom Hotzio Sam Eretz Mitzrayim Beis Avadim. I made a covenant with the people when I was going to take them out of Egypt, saying, Mikei Shavashan Tishluchu Es Yisrachiv Avri Asher Yimacher Lecha V'Avadcha Sheishanim Yishlachul Chav Shem Yimach. That if you have an Eved Ivri, if you have a Jewish slave, it's not forever. You have to send him out after 7 years, right? Yirmiyah is saying, Hashem is saying to Yirmiyah that they didn't do this, right? And in fact, the previous psukim just before this, they would free them and then they go capture them again and put them back into slavery. That was going on before the Churban. Many problematic things. This was one of the problematic things that was going. They should be free, right? As opposed to what we're doing here. And when you had each people, they had different slaves. They made and Hashem says, if you do so, of course, it's not going to be good. In the end, there'll be great suffering because of that. So we see here that there was a problem in the time of Yirmiyah that they didn't set the slaves out, right? But there are sources that say, right, in fact, that perhaps that was what was going on here too. It's a very novel idea that we always think of the Jews as slaves of the Egyptians. But guess what? There were upper class Jews who had slaves themselves of other Jews.
Wow.
Right? They had.
Where are you speaking? In
What?
times of Yirmiyah or in times of the Mitzrayim?
In Mitzrayim. That Yirmiyah is referring to the bris I made in Mitzrayim that I told them they have to let their slaves go. And then based on this thing, I think I don't remember. The Medrash says that there were cases in which the Jewish people first had to send out their slaves, right? It says because here in Yirmiyah it doesn't say you didn't send out the slaves. It says v'lo shamu avotechem elai, v'lo hitu, it says now. At first your ancestors weren't listening to me way back in Mitzrayim, and now you're doing the same thing. So in other words, what they're being told over here is, if you want to go and have Paro let you slaves out, guess what? You can't tell Paro to not let the slaves out if you're not going to let the slaves out. You have to let the slaves out themselves. So that's that Bnei Yisrael, etc. That they should let the slaves out. Okay. So that's a very interesting aspect to this, but it leads to something in a deeper thing. It's a very interesting Rambam. And the Rambam is, oh boy, really came out a tiny, I hope you can read it down there at the bottom. Okay? At the bottom on the first page.
This is the eye test. One eye reading Rambam.
Okay. I'll read it and hopefully you can read it with me. I have a bigger thing over here. It says, Rambam says, and this is in Rambam Hilchos Chametz U'Matzah, speaking about the Seder. B'chol dor v'dor chayev adam leharos es atzmo ke'ilu hu ba'atzmo yotza ata mishuv Mitzrayim. A very famous line in the Rambam. Much commentary about that. Rambam, we know quite famously, B'chol dor v'dor chayev adam leharos es atzmo ke'ilu yotza Mitzrayim. The Rambam doesn't say it that way. He says, B'chol dor v'dor chayev adam leharos es atzmo. What's laharot in that spot? Not to see oneself, but to show oneself, or to sort of act out, to make others think, when you're looking at me, I'm being mar'eh, I'm behaving in a certain way. In other words, even if you, and then we all have that question, really, because that's of course one of the difficult things of the Seder, right? We're really supposed to think about tonight. We went out of Mitzrayim, as he says. We went out today. We went out from Mitzrayim. How many? What?
There's a lot of deciding march on the table.
Hard to do that. Yekkers do that too. But okay. But how much does that help?
Right.
Right.
Like the worst thing we dealt with is, there's no bagels up here.
Maybe.
You can't even relate to living at that level.
Some women feel that I'm finally let out of the servitude of cleaning the house, but they're not quite finished yet. Until after the Seder and after the first day. Maybe they feel that in Eretz Yisrael they get them let out of the second Seder. But it's difficult. So Rambam suggests, you know what? Make believe. You're supposed to harot it atzmo, right? To show, to try to get into it, act it out, as if you went out yourself in Mitzrayim, right? And as part of that, what do you have to do? And that he says that, and because it says you have to remember that you, not your ancestors, but you yourself were a slave. And what does that mean? Lots and lots to talk about, but time and before Pesach and Hashem we can talk about some of that stuff. And then the Rambam goes on. Lefikach therefore, right? Because you have to show that you went out of Mitzrayim. There's a mitzvah. What's the mitzvah? Kishesoeg adam balayla, right? When the person is having their meal, tzarich lechol v'lishtos v'hu meisiv derech cherus. You have to eat and drink v'haseva, right? The leaning over. Right? Well, I don't know if everybody's makbid on that. They're makbid on that during the matzah and during the narbakosos, but you're really supposed to eat the whole soup of that. Right?
It's a little uncomfortable.
What?
I don't think I could eat the whole meal.
Well, you're not used to laying back on your Roman Grecan couch with somebody dropping grapes in your mouth.
Right.
So that's the way it really ought to be.
Right? Fields grapes.
Yeah. So, afilu ani Yisrael lo yochal ad sheyesef, right? This is the third halacha there. Even the poorest person has to have hasava.
It says Isha inat tzricha.
But Isha inat tzricha, but Isha chashuva tzricha. Right? A chashuva woman has to have haseva, and of course all our women today are chashuva. So, right? So in fact, and then if you think that hasava, it's sort of a lechatchila dikadin, that if you have to do haseva, okay, it's a nice thing. You did. Look on the side of the box over there. Shulchan Aruch says, Kol misha tzarech haseva. Anybody who's supposed to do haseva, im achal o shasa below haseva. If you did so without haseva, lo yatsa. Right? You didn't fulfill your obligation. Tzarich lachzor v'lechol v'lishtos haseva. You have to go back and eat it and drink with haseva. Says the Biur Halach Chavetz Chaim. Nira ledas ha'mechaber. Im gomar kol haseudo birich birchas hamazon. He finished, he benched, and then he reminded you, we didn't do haseva. Tzarich lachzor u'levarich hamoitzi. Start all over again. Eat matzah and don't haseva.
Wow.
Right?
Oh my gosh.
Pretty extreme.
Who says that? The Rama?
The Chavetz Chaim, the Biur Halach. He's saying that's what he thinks that the Shulchan Aruch holds.
Mechaber says, he says, Mechaber says,
He's saying Pshat is a Mechaber, Tzarech lachzor v'lechol. Right. That means that you have to go make a mosi and start over. Yeah.
It's a do-over. Absolutely.
Well, where do you see it? It says cut off.
No, not there. In the box.
In this box over
On the
here.
left, the left
So
box.
the whole suit is meaning, that's what you're saying? The whole
I don't know if you have to eat the matzah about it.
On the Biur Halach.
I don't know if you have to eat the kreplach or whatever else you but or the gefilte fish, that not necessarily. Although whatever you eat, you should eat matzah. So haseva seems to be a very
Knedlach, not crap.
knedlach. Sorry. Okay. Yeah. One of my sons-in-law is very into knedlach on Pesach, right?
Do you have some no goodbyes, people?
Forget. Anyway. So, interesting. What's that about? Why is it so? Why does it seems like it's an essential part of the Pesach experience, not just like a nice thing that we also have. I mean, I don't think there's a din if you didn't have charosis, you have to do the seder over, or if you forgot if you didn't do the blood when you did whatever. But this, it's Babas, it's a do-over if you don't do it, right? And even making the question a little stronger, we go to the next page. What's the makor of doing haseva? It's interesting. This comes from, right? This comes from the Medrash. It's one of the only places that it mentions anything about this. Right? The Medrash says on the pasuk in Parshat Beshalach, "Vayasev Elokim es ha'am," that Hashem, instead of taking them directly to Eretz Yisrael, he took them the scenic route, right? Passed through, they went through the Yam Suf, and they went through the Midbar eventually, etc. Right? Vayasev. So you hear the word Vayasev is the same word as Aseva, right? So Medrash, he brings down Amar Rabbi Seinu, Afilu Anisha Yisrael Lo Yochal Ad Sheyasev. From there we learn that even the poorest person can't eat until they do Asava Shekach Asal HaKadosh Baruch Hu Shenemar Vayasev Elokim, because Hashem made the whole people be Mesiv, and therefore we have to do Asava, which is a very odd Medrash. First of all, that Hashem's taking the scenic route. What does it have to do with leaning back while you're eating? It seems, okay, it has the same word, but there's some. That's the only connection. Otherwise, there's nothing in the Torah anywhere where it says you have to do something. We only see that later in Halach, right? Where does that come from? So, in order to get a sense of this, there's a very interesting Maharal. It's in the second box over there. Where's Hashem Perikhavei? And he says as follows: Yesh Bakshim, there are those who ask, Ma Hoel Lanu Hayitziyah. Many people ask this question. We celebrating, we got out of Egypt, right? What good did it do? Harayanu Meshubadim Bishar Malchius. We were again persecuted by the other kings. Demai Shno Malchus Mitzrayim. So it wasn't Mitzrayim, so instead it was the Babylonians, so instead it's the Romans. It's a classic question. In fact, I just happened to mention it yesterday. I don't know why we were talking. We were talking about the Rebbe,
Pictures all over.
Right, and in Yafe Eliach's book,
Yeah.
Tales After the Holocaust, so she has one amazing story in there, in which basically I forget the name of the camp they were in, which was
Plushev.
Plushev?
Yeah.
Okay. Is that the one that's in Schindler's List?
Yes.
That's that camp, right?
There's a reflect.
So in that camp, the Bnei Yisrael was there, and somehow they really worked very hard, and they were able to bribe the guards and save their rations, and somehow they were able to, in the midst of that hell, make some matzahs and have matzahs in the concentration camp, and they even got something in. I don't know if they quite didn't get wine, but they got something with a grape. Maybe they could squeeze a grape into it to make some grape juice. And they went to enormous effort, right? And but when Pesach came, so they got together whoever they could, and obviously with the Nazis watching, they couldn't do too much. But they finally, after months of planning this, they came that night and they said, and they had. And then the Haggadah wasn't a problem to say Avodah B'Yinu wasn't a problem, right? And they had a Pesach Seder, and there was one guy, I think she calls him a free thinker, right? Who was sitting there and observing this and as a theater of the absurd, right? You're celebrating, this freedom as the Chag Cheruseinu in this terrible hell. I mean, what's that about? What's that? I mean, crazy. I remember parenthetically. I remember there was a fellow in Muncie when I was growing up who used to sit in his Pesach Seder in his concentration camp uniform.
Wow.
And
That's how they do
you remember that he went out Me'avzus Lecherus was a pretty amazing thing.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, but they were in the middle of it then. And he said, what's the matter with you? So the Rebbe, said, ignored it for a bit. And then he said to him, I want to say the Manishtana with you. Right? Manishtana alayla zamikol alaylos. How is this night, right, as in Eli Wiesel's night,
Right.
how is this night different from all other nights? Shebachol alaylos anu ochlu chametz u'matzah, alayla hazet kula matzah. All the other nights is chametz and matzah, where if chametz represents something that's a little bit more fancy, then matzah is just lechem oni, just the bread and pork. Other times we've had where there's been some good, some bad. Now it's kula matzah. Kol alaylo shayra kula moror. It's all bitter, right? You think we're not aware of that? We're all aware of that. But yet, the Rebbe said to this guy, we're supposed to affirm Avadim Hayinu L'Paro B'Mitzrayim, that we were like Avadim to slaves to Paro in Mitzrayim, but by Yetzienu Hashem took us out of there. And that we, since then, have been taken out. And in fact, who's the freer people here? Those animals out there who kill us and harness and torture us for that, or us, who even in this situation are able to exercise our free will and do whatever we can to follow our own sense of what's right and what's important, and despite what they're doing, we're exhibiting, in fact, the greatest degree of freedom. I don't remember everything, but that was basically the essence of what was said in that story. It's an amazing story.
Yeah.
And now a lot of that's sort of what the Maharal is saying over here. He says that somebody asked such a question. Divrei Havayeh. That's ridiculous. Why? It's emptiness. Ki kasher yatsu Yisrael min Mitzrayim. When Jews went out of Mitzrayim, kiblu hatov be'etzem. They got good be'etzem. It means they became an essential part of them. Ad shahayu re'uyim ba'atzmam lios b'nei chayrim mitzad ma'alasim. Until they were able to become Bnei Chorin, people who are free of spirit because of the great level. Mezos Hamala Atzmis Yisrael, and that became Atzmis, and then it became internal, became essential, became part of the DNA of Bnei Yisrael. Shehem Re'uyim Lios Bnei Chorin, that they can be free. Mitzad Etzem Alosam. B'davar Mikri, and some temporary thing, right? Lo Yivatel Davar Atzmi. That does not cancel an essential thing. Maharal, I don't know much Maharal. I'm not that into the Maharal, but I know he talks often about about something that's mikra and something that's less. I quoted to you the other day, or something I used to hear from Rabbi Braun when I was late for Shacharis too often. He said, I said, this happened, that happened. He said that hamikra la yasmin, right? Quoting the Maharal. That's something that's just happened to happen. That doesn't happen all the time. So it's a mikra. Okay, we happen to be right now the Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Romans. We are bigger than that, right? We're bigger than that. Ki adayin shel al Yisrael hamala hazo shehem bnei chorib. That we have to know that deep down we are free people. The etzem im hashibud b'mikra. And the shibud, the enslavement, that is what's temporary. That just happens to be. Ki achar shahotzi hakadosh baruch hu Yisrael Mitzrayim. After Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim, b'nosan osanu b'nei chorib, He made them free. Not only were we made free, we were made into kings. As it says, that we, Hashem considered us to be a kingdom of priests, that we're like Malachim. Right? And that, and Hashem hu Yisrael be'etzem. And that is part of that's part of our essence, that we have this thing that we are like kings. That's put something in the note, right? And it doesn't go away. Begalusam shu b'mikra, and therefore Chachmei Yisrael said, "Kol Yisrael b'nei Malachim heimach begalusam." That we are considered to be b'nei Malachim, or you said b'nos Malachim, even when we're in Golus. V'zeh mitzad hamalah hachashiva shekol Yisrael be'etzem, and it doesn't go away, right? It doesn't, and it goes on and on. The Rab Maral, I find him to be repetitive. Sometimes he says the same thing 3 times, more or less. But he says that's basically the idea that he's saying, right? That what happened when we went out of Mitzrayim is we got out of Mitzrayim in the sense we would never again be completely enslaved people. From that point on, it was never a time that we were able to completely enslave us. So. Perhaps, maybe that's what's going on. To answer the questions that at the beginning, what was Hashem saying to Moshe here? Vayitzadeinu Bnei Yisrael lo paro Bnei Mitzrayim. Hashem is telling Moshe to tell first of all, right, Bnei Yisrael, you should know. Yeah, you have these problems now, and then there's no straw, and there's this problem, and there's kotzeruach, and these things are going to be different. And you're going to be sarvanim, and you're going to throw stones, etc. And you have problems. But there's a certain essential essence to you that's going to come out when you go out of Mitzrayim that will never be the same. And you have to be low. See us b'nei Yisrael Mitzrayim. They will be taken out of that. And it's important that every person, when they're going through, if they don't get that in the Pesach experience, that we are b'nei chayrin, even if we're an ani, even if a person is very poor, if they don't feel like, I'm b'nei malachim. I eat the way Bnei Galachim. Now this night is to tell me, right, even with the Bluzha Rebbe over there and certainly in other places, that we are Bnei Galachim, that we have the ability to eat B'Haseba, that we're eating in a way in which we're celebrating that we completely got out free. And that was the message that you have to give to that Moshe Rabbeinu. And you have to tell that to Paro too. Paro, was afraid of that. Paro didn't want them to even go for a day or 2 or 3 to the Midbar because he was afraid, His method of enslavement is don't give them time to think, don't give them any freedom, because if they do, Power, you should know, they ain't going to help. They are Bnei Malachim, they are Bnei Chorin, they're going to come out, etc. And that was what Moshe was trying to accomplish, was told to accomplish. And even if right now they're going through, in fact, that's why it's interesting, by Yaseh Elokim, we dafka learn it from there, right? Is because it's in a place where they were taken to a place where things weren't going in the straight way, and things weren't going in the way that they would hope would be the easy way. It's going to go in a difficult way and go through the Yamsuf. And it's only going to go through the Yamsuf, they're only going to be able to go if you have an Achshav and Aminada to jump in and be willing to have the Emunah to say that even in difficult times we're going ahead, we're going to do it, if we believe in Hashem, He'll take us out of that. That's an important aspect of the whole experience. Yes, we have this ability, but we have to step up to the plate and we have to do what we can to get ourselves out. But Hashem is there pushing us, asking us, to recognize who our essence is and where we're coming from, where we're going to. So that's a big part of why we do have to do Haseba and why we have these issues. There's one I'll say, and what I wanted to go to. You ran out of time. We started. I think this is related to one interesting thing. I'll say it in 2 or 3 sentences. One of the big issues of Parshat VaEra, it said, is Paro and Hashem hardening his heart, and he took away his free will. There's always a lot of talk about that. The Meshech Chachma says that there was one other person who Hashem took away their Bechira. We always heard Hashem took Paro's Bechira away. You know who else he took his Bechira away from? And that's why he got that title. Was from Moshe. Moshe had no Bechira. And he says, first of all, he had no Bechira. Of course, he did earlier in life, and we talked about that last week, right? But Moshe, at the point where he was brought to Sinai, he was going to be the conduit from which we got the Torah. He no longer had Bechira, that he could say something different than Hashem said.
Oh,
right?
interesting.
Because if he didn't have Bechira, how do we know? Maybe, there were certain prophets who were good guys, and then they went off after a time. Moshe didn't have that choice. He had to do that thing. To take Bechira was taken away. Very interesting. The introduction of the Chaneshach Chachma to Sefer Shmos. But to take from that I was going to tie that to this in the sense that, Bechira is the most important thing that we have, free will. But the highest level of Bechira is to make the choice not to have choice. To make the choice to say, I don't have a Bechira. This is what I got to do. This is what I have to do. That's halacha says. To give the Bechira, so to speak, back to God. That's the biggest choice that we have today.
Yeah.
And if we do that, Mr. Shem, the Gula will come.